I still haven't quite figured out how to style it yet. What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be doing another Godzilla X Kong The New Empire discussion video. In the last one we covered my top 10 least favorite things in Godzilla X Kong The New Empire, and I don't just want to sit here and spread negativity because I did really like the movie. So in this one we will be covering my top 15 favorite things from Godzilla X Kong The New Empire. Let's do it, guys. The last list was a little tricky to create because there were some things I really wanted to put on the list, but I didn't know exactly how strongly I felt about them. For instance, the geography and compression of time in The New Empire is definitely one of my least favorite things about the movie. That didn't make my list only because I actually find it laughably bad. Like, I think it is so absurd how poorly they did at communicating geography in the film and just teleporting Godzilla from one location to the next that it's almost hard for me to even be upset about it. It's just, they didn't even make an attempt. Things just appear where they appear and then the movie moves on. This list was equally difficult to make, but for different reasons, because there was a lot of things I wanted to make the list, but I didn't know how to narrow it down to my top favorites. Whereas there it was like a matter of, do I really feel that strongly about this thing? Here it's a matter of, okay, now which of these things do I feel the strongest about? And so I think I've gotten a list down to my top 15 favorites, and some of these things I definitely have issues with, but on the whole these are ideas or things that I felt really had a lot of potential and were pretty cool. Well, I don't think all of that potential was achieved in some of these cases. On the whole, there was a lot of good stuff. One little thing that isn't on my list that I really liked, this is just a bonus up at the top, is when Kong first sees the big frog and the frog's doing the Kong call and he thinks it's one of his kind. It's the music that plays right there. While I don't like Junkie XL's music, I do think moments like that really work, especially because he's using this stuff from Godzilla vs. Kong, his Kong and Jia motif and his Kong theme that really worked well for that movie. And he's bringing that back and expanding upon it, which I appreciated. Getting into my actual top 15 list, starting out with my number 15, this is one that I don't think lives up to the potential at all, but it's the premise of having Jia and Mothra as a pair. I really love the idea of giving Jia this mystical connection to the Titans. Obviously she's got a connection with Kong, and so she's uniquely able to relate to and understand the Titans like no one else, especially because she was originally the last of the Iwi, and she's certainly the last of the Iwi that has lived with the monsters to the extent that the Skull Island Iwi have. While there are Hollow Earth Iwi now, it seems like they're a bit more sheltered than the Skull Island ones were. And I really like the idea that Jia was the one who was able to summon Mothra. Not only did it give Jia something to do in the movie, but it also creates an even wider net for Jia's character, where now she's not only the translator for Kong, but she's also this connection to Mothra as well. And I would have liked to see the Mothra twins back. That's something that I think the movie should have done, and I would have liked if they developed this plot a little more, but I like the idea of it. I think it's a really cool idea. Number 14, this is my 14 only because it is so short. It is the Kong versus Skar King fight. The very first fight the two of them have is so dynamic and exciting. I love all the different ways Skar King's able to rebound and bounce off of all Kong's attacks and able to get the upper hand on him, just showing how much of a skilled fighter Skar King really is. And while that fight is way too short for its own good, it is really exciting when it's happening. Number 13, another thing that I'm a little conflicted about because on one hand I wish this was done better, but on the other hand it is pretty awesome, and that's the soundtrack list itself. Not Junkie's music, but the licensed music. The music they've used in this movie, it's kick-ass. Songs like Twilight Zone, they're so freaking good, man. And opening on Jim Reeves's Welcome to My World, it's just this awesome, beautiful moment, and it definitely calls back to the intro of Godzilla vs. Kong. That's an intentional parallel for sure, and I really liked it. And then there's stuff like the Hardwire synthwave song that plays when everybody's suiting up. That's just kick-ass. That's, I believe, Adam Wingard's actual music. I believe that's him doing that. I love the synthwave in GVK. I loved that they use synthwave in this movie. It adds a very sci-fi flair to these things. It's cool. Turn Me Loose playing when Trapper brings all of those flying things in to save the day was so awesome. Verticines, I know what they're called. And yes, I do think the music was a little too short for its own good. Like, if you're gonna play a song, play it, but I do like the music that they picked. I'm hoping that if they do another one of these, they use the music a little better. Like, use more of it. Play the music for longer. Use the music as a way to bring us into the action rather than as a way to introduce a sequence, which is how it was used here. It just played at the bumper of different scenes rather than during the scenes, which could have been awesome. Number 12 is Kong being a thinking animal. I love loved how intelligent they made Kong in this movie. I was a little worried they were going to go overboard with Kong doing sign language in this film after the last movie. The fact that he only signs one more thing in this movie I thought was really cool, because it shows that while Kong's learning, he's still not a person. He's not a guy. He's still a monster. And I like that they didn't go overboard on the sign language, but they showed that Kong has been learning and evolving in different ways. All the different traps and areas he's set all over Hollow Earth, that was really exciting to see him do. And it helps build the idea that there really could have been a Kong civilization smart enough to create the temple from Godzilla vs. Kong, and we are now seeing, now that he's off the island and he's able to grow a little more, Kong has been able to learn and adapt in ways he was never forced to before, which has made him even smarter than he ever was. It was just awesome. I loved that stuff. Number 11, referencing the comics in very small but I thought meaningful ways. As you guys know on the channel, I'm really frustrated with the MonsterVerse canon overall. I think that Legendary really doesn't understand their own continuity. I don't think the filmmakers often really care about what the continuity is, and I don't think there's any grasp on what the actual broad story of the MonsterVerse is. And so by having small references like Tiamat showing up in this movie, that is enough for me to say, okay, at least this stuff matters. The comics matter to some regard. Whether or not they specifically acknowledge the events of those comics, I would sure like them to. I like that they are referencing them in some ways, because that's the first time we've ever had a comic moment brought into one of the movies, and I really thought it was cool. Having Tiamat show up was so awesome, and so I was a big fan of that. And not only did she look absolutely fantastic in this movie, but it was just exciting for us fans of the MonsterVerse to get to see one of those characters adapted into live action. I hope the comic references become more meaningful moving forward. The MonsterVerse really isn't that large. There's a couple comics and a couple movies. It's not that hard to keep up with, and yet for some reason they sometimes can't. Number 10, this is something I've been waiting to see for a while, and I finally got to see it, and that's Godzilla as the King of the Monsters. Godzilla earns the title of the King of the Monsters at the end of the 2019 film, which is awesome. It's super cool to see all the Titans bow to him. And then they didn't really do much with that in live action. While the comic books have showed Godzilla doing his King of the Monsters-ly duties, we never got to see that in the movies. Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Kong shows up and he's like a brand new character. So it was kind of cool to see in this movie going back to that King of the Monsters era. Showing Godzilla fight Scylla at the top of this movie was so kick-ass. Not only was it cool to see one of those King of the Monsters Titans return, but it was cool to see the way Godzilla goes out of his way to still defend humanity, like we were told he did at the end of King of the Monsters. It felt like Godzilla's duty to do that, and I really liked that stuff. I want to see more of that moving forward. I love the idea of Godzilla being the King of the Monsters, and I'd like to see him do that a little more, not in relation to the big bad. I like when it's not the big bad that he's fighting. It's always cool to see stuff like that. Number 9, this is shocking. I never ever would have thought this would make my list before the movie, and that's Bernie and Trapper. I put the two of them together because they are the dynamic duo in this movie. The two of them are electric together. They bounce off each other in such fun and exciting ways. I feel like Bernie really walks the line between being too much, but over the course of the movie steps back a bit, and somehow Trapper, being this incredibly over-the-top character, is able to balance Bernie in a completely opposite way, and the two of them really work together. I also loved their bromance. It was adorable and so much fun. Trapper's whole easygoing attitude was just really kind and pleasant for this movie, and it really contributes to the idea that this movie is just a feel-good, wholesome time. I really appreciate stuff like that. Number 9 is Shimo's design and powers. While I didn't think Shimo was used to her potential, the design is so classically Toho, and so is the power. I like that in Monarch Legacy of Monsters, they kind of go out of their way with the Frostbark to have this subtle explanation that rather than creating ice storms out of its mouth, the Frostbark eats heat, and so it freezes things in reverse. It takes the heat away from something. And then in this movie, they just went full balls to the wall. Shimo can blast ice beams out of her mouth. I think that's fun. It's a very Toho-styled thing, and I like giving more powers to more monsters. Godzilla shouldn't be the only one with the power. I like the idea that also in this movie, Scylla is able to just shoot spider webs, and we see here, Shimo is able to create these huge ice storms and all this cool stuff. It just felt very classically Godzilla to me, and I like that classic Godzilla flair. Number 7, the anti-gravity battle. This was so kick-ass. It's the most unique setting we've seen any of the monsters fight within the MonsterVerse. It takes Godzilla and Kong to a new terrain neither of them have ever fought in before, that being midair. While I didn't think it was integrated into the story well at all, I actually think the explanation of how they get there is one of the worst in the movie. I would have preferred if it was just simply the gravity field that Kong had already gone through in Godzilla vs. Kong that they were fighting in. I appreciated the set piece itself because it led to some really awesome moments, like Godzilla flying through the air, tail whipping apes through the air, Mothra flying around, kicking ass, Kong trying his best. Kong doesn't really get much to do in that gravity fight, but the gravity fight itself was just such a cool Godzilla moment, and I'm really glad we got to see something like that. Number 6 is having Having Godzilla, Kong, and Mothra in the same shot at the same time. Oh my god, that is the most iconic thing that you could do. Having the top 3 biggest movie monsters of all time in one shot together is so exciting, and I can't believe it has taken this long to happen. And I can't believe that the first time King Kong, Mothra, and Godzilla get to cross over in a movie, it's in a United States Godzilla film. It's just weird that it took this long. This is something that should have happened back in the 1960s, and so seeing it here now was so exciting. I wish we could have seen them team up a little more, but having them team up during that gravity fight was cool enough, and I like the idea that in the future the 3 of them can be a trio. That is going to be super exciting if they go forward with that. Number 5 is Kong's personality. I feel like overall Kong was portrayed really well in this movie. Having him do sign language a little bit was cool because it showed his intelligence. It also showed that he still has that human connection. He hasn't lost that sense of human connection. But also having him become a superhero in this movie was so cool. King Kong is a character that has slowly always kind of walked the line between monster and superhero. You know, in the 80s they advertised America's biggest superhero is back with King Kong Lives, and this movie really plays into that premise. Kong having some agency of his own in this movie was also really nice. Not only is he just allowed screen time to himself to breathe, which is some of the best moments in Godzilla vs. Kong, and we get a lot of that in this movie, but he doesn't have to be bogged down by other things going on. He doesn't need backup during the fight. When he fights the big water snake, it's not like a heave has to come in and save him. This goes to show that Kong really could have handled the war bat all by himself. They didn't need to waste Kong's agency by having him constantly be rescued in Godzilla vs. Kong. I really like that in this movie Kong's just able to do things on his own and go out of his way to be a good guy. Having Kong do things like save the ape from falling off the cliff, or at least trying to, and then helping the ape up, it just showed that he is the most kind-hearted of all monsters that there ever is. I really like the idea that Mothra and Kong are just these 2 incredibly benevolent forces that are so pure-hearted, and they're balanced against Godzilla, who's the ultimate powerhouse but is also kind of an asshole. I think it's cool. It's why the duo of Godzilla and Mothra work together, and is now why the duo between Godzilla and Kong work together so well. Number 4, this was one where I just didn't know how high to put it. It originally was my number 1, but I moved it down, and that's Skar King. Just in general, his presence, his personality, his weird mannerisms. He is instantly iconic. He is incredibly memorable. They wanted him to be Kong's Ghidorah, and they almost pulled it off. All they would have had to do is keep him around for like one more movie, and then they really could have succeeded because he is so powerful when he's on screen. His fighting style is unique and different than any of the monsters we've seen so far. He's just exciting to watch in action. His whip is awesome. I love the way he's just purely tyrannical and unapologetically a bad guy. It's really interesting, and it contrasts super well with the pure-hearted nature of Kong. Skar King's design was awesome. I think he just looks cool and terrifying, and I think the premise of Skar King is really epic. I was not disappointed with the personality they gave him either, despite the fact that he could have been played as something a lot scarier. Giving him that very sinister, almost Joker-like personality was an even more interesting direction to go with it. Next up, number 3 is Godzilla and Kong doing team-ups. They don't do them often, and that's one of my bigger missed opportunity moments in this movie, but seeing the small moments, like when Godzilla and Kong run together and Kong jumps on Godzilla's back and then leaps into the air, or the best moment in the movie in the final battle, when Kong grabs Skar King and throws him at Godzilla, Godzilla bats him into the air and then Kong grabs him again. That is so awesome. We need more epic Godzilla team-up moments. They're always iconic whenever they happen, and I loved that Godzilla got to do a proper team-up with Kong. Some of the best moments in Godzilla vs. Kong, if not the best moments, is when Kong and Godzilla take on Mechagodzilla together and seeing the way they fight as one. These movies don't often have them fight as one. It kind of splits them up constantly. GVK, one of them gets knocked out, and then it's kind of a 1v1, and then the other one gets knocked out, and it's kind of a 1v1. And then in this movie, they were fighting 2 separate opponents. So I hope in the next team-up movie, there's one unified threat that the 2 of them can fight together, and we can really see some creative team-up moves between the 2 of them. I pitched on Twitter, and some people expanded upon it, but one really cool thing to see would be the iconic King Kong vs. Godzilla 1962 tail swing moment. Kong grabbing Godzilla by the tail and swinging him around almost the way he uses Suko as a weapon in this movie, except that Godzilla is totally down for it. That'd be really fun. Especially if they're doing it in the anti-gravity field and Godzilla's using his atomic breath to blast things around him. It could just be really exciting. I would love to see more team-ups between the 2 of them. Totally skipped this on the first recording, so I have to re-record this. My number 2 is Godzilla vs. Kong's rematch. I personally love Godzilla and Kong as enemies. I just think they are really fun when they're fighting. They're just so different that it's really cool to see the ways in which they fight, and this movie does that really well, not only showing how Kong has evolved as a fighter. I love the way that Kong splashes dirt in Godzilla's eye, but also showing the way that both of them have such different personalities through the fighting alone. Kong is not there to fight Godzilla. He's there to get Godzilla's help, and he's a more reasonable creature. He can think through things before he does them, time. Godzilla is pure animalistic instinct, and there's no thought, just destroy. Godzilla runs headfirst into a pyramid, playing up the dynamic that was already present in Godzilla vs. Kong, but taking it to the extreme, as both monsters are now on further ends of the spectrum. Whereas in GVK it was a battle to the death, here it isn't. Kong isn't trying to kill Godzilla, he just needs his help, and Godzilla's trying to kill Kong. By making them that much more extreme, it makes the fight that much more entertaining. I love all the different moves in it as well. Godzilla suplexing Kong is incredible, and I love to see the way that Godzilla is just absolutely not prepared to get his shit rocked when he gets punched in the face and knocked out by Kong. And that leads to one of the best, if not the best moment in the movie, at least my favorite moment, is when Kong is dragging Godzilla's tail into the portal. Now, if they wanted to, they could have definitely had Kong swing Godzilla's tail into the portal, King Kong versus Godzilla style, or they could have had Kong utilize the Thunder Punch, a very underutilized thing in this movie, to turn the tides of the fight a second time, drag it on longer. But obviously they didn't have the run time for that. They needed to end things quickly, and having Mothra be the one to actually win the fight was so classic, calling back to Ghidorah the three-headed monster, and finally putting the beef between Godzilla and Kong to bed, as Godzilla now fully understands Kong's not his enemy and they can team up and it is okay. And there is a little moment of acknowledgement at the end of the movie. It's kind of hard to tell, but Kong gives Godzilla this look like, you see that? We're pretty cool together, and Godzilla gives Kong this look like, damn right we are. It's this cute little moment right before Godzilla blasts his beam into the sky and saves the day. And I like that we got one final rematch between the two of them before we got there. I love the two of them fighting. It's just super fun. Number one, this is the best and biggest thing the movie did, and this is all Adam Wingard, I feel. I feel like this is Adam Wingard's strength, and that is trying new things. Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire did not feel derivative of any of the previous films to me at all. There are certainly moments where I feel like they're borrowing plot structures from other films. There's certainly moments where I feel like they're taking a lot of heavy inspo from some of the other MonsterVerse movies, or from some of the other Godzilla or Kong movies, or kaiju movies in general, but I feel like, generally speaking, this movie is constantly trying brand new things and trying to innovate with these characters. Not all of those big swings are gonna land, but I really appreciate that it's taking them. Taking Godzilla and Kong to brand new territories, terrains, different worlds, different fighting styles. We see different types of characters. We just are presented with different things for these characters to do than they've ever had to do before. That's exciting, and that's awesome, and that's the most valuable thing this movie did, because whether or not you like this movie, its impact will go so much further, and it will remain as a result of it trying new things. In 20 years' time, there's going to be a filmmaker working on another Godzilla movie who will be pulling heavy inspo from this film because this film tried new things. That's the value of Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, and that's my favorite part of it. What are your favorite things from Godzilla X Kong? I won't ask you to rank top 15, but what are your top 3 favorite things from Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire? Comment below and let me know. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you want to check out the Patreon, you can use the link in the description below, where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys next time for the next one. D-Man out.